Alright, shalom. First and foremost, we'll say Kalayim Yahweh Bashim Yoshua Bashim Hadash. The honesty, the others, and the apostles, the great most don't cheat, most to won't teach well. Turning into Titus 3, 9, and 10, for the pundits in town, and we're going to the word heretic. So Titus 3 and 9. Before foolish questions and genealogies, contentions, and strivings about the law for the unprofitable and vain. Right? The law is simple. Right? So don't engage in these different things and strivings and blah 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 blah. That's kind of like IUIC's thing. You just kind of go into like, hey, like you guys claim that the law is salvation and everything. Like you guys aren't even keeping Passover right. I know you're not getting what's like a male lamb and killing it on almost like the 13th day or 14th day. Everything, and it has to be a lamb without blemish, so you have to have a farm or no farm and no butcher, and you have to make sure that it's like perfect. You have to like see the lamb physically and then see him get butchered, right? And then then when you take that lamb home, then you do everything else, right? You're not doing that. You guys are probably going to the supermarket. We are going to a butcher, but how do you know it's a male lamb, right? Even if you do have a male lamb, how do you know it's a male lamb without blemish, right? So you don't engage in those kind of topics with those guys, right? Or them trying to say that you can only have one wife, right? Which that's off, right? You don't have to have one wife, right? You can have multiple wives, right? Our fathers had multiple wives, right? Jacob had multiple wives. The Most High never rebuked him for that. Right? He never said, hey, you going off for having all these, for all these women, man. Never. Right? They were just used as a tool to bring about, our brothers, man. Bring about the tribes and everything. Right? So, but avoid foolish questions and genealogy and contentions and strivings about the law, for they are unprofitable and vain. A man that is a heretic after the first and second admonition reject. Right? So a man that's a heretic after the first and second admonition reject. Admonition is pretty much rebuke. Right? A heretic, able to choose a thing, schismatic heretic from the Greek words heretikos, heretic. Right? So it goes from aratizo, to choose, right? To make a choice, to choose to belong to a sect, right? From hareo, to take for oneself, to prefer, right? In other words, you're like profane. You chose a way that is, outside of the scriptures, man. That's outside of Yahweh Bashim Yahushai, right? And we were all like that at one point. We were following the Christian church, we were following the Catholic church, whose ways are outside the scriptures, in all kinds of ways, man. From the way that they teach, right? They don't teach no precepts or nothing like that. They just go into, feel good scriptures or scriptures about giving money and giving tithes, so they could suck the congregation dry and everything. The church don't teach the young woman to, be, keepers at home or nothing like that, right? Even when it comes to the doctrine of the law, keeping the law to the best of the ability, right? And the way they look at sin, right? They don't look at sin as like, for us, right? Say something like eating pork. Like we don't do that, right? We just don't eat that shit, right? There's certain things that we can't avoid. Adultery, we can avoid that. We don't do that shit, right? Buying on the Sabbath or working on the Sabbath, that's something that we can't avoid, right? We just teach, hey, just keep pushing, right, until we get to the kingdom, right? And we go into that. Also, Romans 6, man, that sin, we sin because you're under grace. God forbid, right? So we still have salvation through grace, salvation through faith. But they butcher it and they say, oh, you're free to do anything. Right? You could be gay, and be in the congregation. And, Alright, so yeah, that was pretty much that. So the word heretic, etymology online, or etymon online, one who holds a doctrine at variance with established dominant standards, myth for century heretic, from Church Latin hereticus, hereticus, something like that, of or belonging to a heresy, a heretic, from Greek hereticals, to be able to choose, right? New Testament heretical, see heresy, right? Doctrine or opinion at variance is heresy now, of established standards, or Johnson defines it, an opinion of private men different from that of the Catholic and Orthodox Church, right? Circa 1200s, from Old French heresy, and by extension, sodomy, immorality, right? So heresy, it goes back to the Old French and goes back to sodomy, immorality. These things go hand in hand, man. Immorality, because that's the shit that was going on amongst these, even back then, pretty much. And that's pretty much the stuff that was going on in this world, and if it was back then, it was okay, and at times now, it was okay. So when we came to the truth, we had to, learn, hey man, that shit wicked, right? And so on and so forth, and that, so on and so forth. I don't really have anything to say about that, but even though the scripture says Jacob was a law unto ourselves, maybe those of us that grew up in a Christian church, in our minds, we knew that, like, even though they said, oh, these people can belong to the congregation, we always knew in the back of their mind, like, yo, man, this dude is fucking wicked, man. This shit is evil, Right, the whole thing. I remember growing up hearing about this Adam and Eve, not Adam and Steve, From Latin, hieris, school of thought, philosophical sect. Latin word is heresis, taking of choosing for oneself, right? I mean, taking, what does this remind you of? Aleister Crowley, man, right? The whole mystery school system, do what thou wilt, and all that, right? This is the same thing, right? Which the elites, they follow, right? And the people follow a shadow of that, They follow a mere shadow of that. Like even the gangs are pretty much, lower level, like Masons, on like a lower level, man. With these jakes and everything, they taught them like that, right? Esau ran a number on our people, pretty much, right? And even when it comes to, those things, can't forget the Italian mafia and all that. They pretty much, had a blood oath to get in, right? Different blood oaths and different things like that to get in. Like, this is the most important thing in your life. You must be willing to sacrifice and so on and so forth. Right, but with us, it's spiritual. Even though we don't take no blood oath. I think with them, they actually cut themselves on the Bible or something like that. Or I thought I remember hearing something like that. They give you like a gun in the Bible or something like that, or something like that. I can't remember what it is, but they have some ritual. But with us, we have a spiritual, pledge. It's all spiritual with us. Like, hey, count the cost before you get in this thing. And the Lord has to work with your spirit, and like, hey man, I'm willing to stake my life on this thing. I'm willing to, push in this work, do work, put in work, and shit. If I gotta miss things, if I gotta miss shit with family, if I gotta miss this with that, if I had kids, I gotta miss shit with my kids to come out here and push this truth. It's just gonna be what it is, man. I gotta do what I gotta do, right? This truth comes first, man, right? It means taking a deliberate plan, purpose, philosophical sex school, hierestai, take, seize, heron, choose, what are unknown, origin, probably cognate with Hittite, Sarul, booty, Well, Buddha, there's no etymology, so it's like kind of debatable, right? But we know that, you know, what is it? Like all languages pretty much come back to the Hebrew. Hebrew is like really the first language, right? Because all those things, they deviated out of the Hebrew, right? Because remember, before the split, the Tower of Babel, everyone spoke Hebrew, right? And the language split off, right? So we don't gotta go into other things, but the Greek word was used by church. I guess I'll go into this. It was used by church writers, reference to various sects in schools, etc. In the New Testament, the Sadducees, the Pharisees, and the Christians as sects of Judaism. Hence the meaning unorthodox religious sect or doctrine, right? Even the Christians. Oh, okay, yeah, because that's what they are. They are sects of Judaism. We are, I think you say a sect of Judaism, right? In a way, or Judaizos, way of the Jews. But we believe that our way is the true way. You're supposed to believe on Yahweh Hashem Yahushai, right? Yahweh Yahushai. That Messiah is Yahushai. He came 2,000 years ago, right? And he sacrificed himself up, gave up his blood for sins of our people. Now we're now waiting again for his return, right? Like it says in Acts, right? But English Bibles usually translate as sect, transferred use in English from late 14th century. So, yeah, that's pretty much it, man. So, heretic is pretty much a school, right? Lower level, as the Crowley doctrines and things like that, right? Mystery school doctrine, what goes back to these heathen, Babylonian mystery school shit, that was still practiced in Greek and Rome and so on and so forth. So the one edified, I say shalom.